the newsagents.
They paid the price for their incompetence, their dishonesty and their rule-breaking.
We are still selling arms to Israel. I thought we were voting for change, Rachel.
This is a changed Labour Party, a Labour Party that represents working people, not a party of protest.
There are times when a heckler is a gift from heaven. And in a way today, for Rachel Reeves, making her speech as the first woman Chancellor ever, it was just that. Because Labour are no longer a party of protest. They are the party in power. And today was the manifestation of that, the first full day of the Labour Party conference.
But there is a question which is lingering over the conference centre in Liverpool, and it's not actually about tickets, and it's not actually about hospitality or what glasses Keir Starmer wears or clothes that Rachel Reeves has had bought for her. It is a question which is far more fundamental and far more important. Labour are now in power. They have all the power. What are they actually going to do with it? Welcome to the newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And it's noisy because we are in the middle of the Labour conference floor, surrounded by lovely people who've come to see if they can sort of hear what we're talking about, really, as we try and record. We've just come out of the Chancellor's speech. Give everyone a wave. Hello, everyone. Hello.
And obviously, what they really want to hear about is how fast the tickets are going at the Royal Albert Hall for the 1st of December.
No, these people, they're getting it for free. They're not going to pay.
They are.
They're very
They're getting it in person.
Yeah. No, we're going to get some money out of them. Anyways, look, just to say that the tickets have gone so fast that the Royal Albert Hall have had to release a few more. There are not many left. Buy now to avoid disappointment. That's our message, isn't it?
You are going to be hearing later from Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and we're going to hear from Tom Baldwin, who's written the closest thing, I guess, that we have to an autobiographical biography of Keir Starmer, and he's angry, actually, and he says that Keir Starmer is angry about the last week of headlines surrounding whatever we're calling it, tickets.
And he is very clear that heads need to roll in Downing Street from the operation, and that people have become consumed by office politics, and that is just not good enough.
First, we should talk about Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's speech. First speech from the floor of an actual Chancellor of the Exchequer since at a Labour Party conference since Alistair Darling in 2009. First speech ever from any party conference for a woman Chancellor, female Chancellor, something that she talked about at the very beginning, 800 years worth of having Chancellors of the Exchequer. This is the first time that we've had a woman in that job, and she, obviously, what she has been trying to do, she did a series of broadcasts around interviews this morning. What she and numbers 10 and 11 are both trying to do now in concert is to try and turn the page on what has been, a pretty torrid week or so of headlines and news stories which have been relentless and it's getting worse in different sorts of ways on Donorgate, Ticketgate, whatever you want to call it, the first gate of this government, particularly important given that actually both the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Prime Minister themselves are directly affected and implicated within it because both have accepted donations or hospitality or whatever that has come under scrutiny. So what she was trying to do in the speech and in the broadcast round is to turn the page and to try and turn attention to actually what the Labour Party wants the next 3 to 6 months to be about.
And I thought what was difficult for her in this speech was essentially it was a speech that she could have made last year. And very possibly did, because there were very few revelations, because we're still waiting for the budget that will come in, a month's time. And so she's slightly hamstrung by how much she can spell out of what she's going to do. The biggest round of applause, the standing ovation, came when she said she was going to claw back or, set up an inquiry that would try to claw back some £670 million of kind of corrupt COVID spending from the last government. She'd announced it last year. I think today's line is that there is now a body ready to go. The tricky thing really with this speech is if you're trying to move the agenda on, you haven't actually got much in your grasp to hold on to.
You know, I'm sure a lot of the newspaper journalists now and the people who are producing the TV bulletins or the radio bulletins later on are saying, what's our top line? What's our top line from this speech? Is it breakfast clubs? Is it no return to austerity?
Is it the heckling that came about 10 minutes in?
And also the thing that is in my mind, and with Lewis, you talk about the concerted move that there has been from number 10 and number 11 to turn the page on the doom and gloom. Was that always the strategy? Was it always their thinking that come party conference, we've got to give a bit of sunny up plans? Or are they responding to the adverse publicity that you're overdoing the doom and gloom, you're talking
Voters
the country into recession? Come on, the Labour MPs are pissed off as well because of winter fuel payments. You've got to give us something that seems a bit more positive. And I don't know whether this was strategy that was worked out in July or a response to events where things have not turned out as they've wanted to. No. In the same way that we talk about Donergate, in the same way we talk about, Sue Gray's salary, are they just responding to stuff that's gone badly wrong and misfired?
So I think there are two questions about this speech and about this conference generally. Right? One is, can they turn the page on these stories? Talking to people in number 10 this morning, they think that by the end of the week, they will have managed to basically ride it out. That there is nothing further. Everyone, because most of this stuff is all coming from stuff that's been declared, right? It's all literally in the register of interest.
All you have to do is log onto a website and read it. It's not that you have to dig around to get the stuff out.
Indeed so. So this narrative because the narrative has been that this is a problem, journalists have been going through it sort of piece by piece and story by story, and then getting a bit of evidence on top of that, talking to people, and stories emerge. They hope that by the end of the week, although they talk to them privately, they know it's been damaging. They know it's been damaging. They know that partly because of the way that Starmer came to office, talking about probity so much, they know it's especially damaging for him. They know they responded to it badly in terms of the initial communication strategy, and it took time in order to get a line that held, which I think, to be fair, Rachel Reeves actually had dealt with it reasonably adroitly in the broadcast round this morning. The second question is, I think, far more important for the long-term vitality of this government, which is, what is this Labour government about, and where is it taking us? I mean, I thought your critique about it being a speech that she could have delivered last year is in its own way quietly quite devastating and quietly quite concerning, I think, for people in this conference who want this Labour government to be a success. Because I think these two things are connected. Why is it that Donergate, let's put it, use that term, why has it come to dominate so many of the headlines over the previous few weeks and month or so? Part of the reason is because there's been a void.
Nothing else.
There's been a void. In news management terms, there's been a void. The government, after an initial couple of weeks of flurry of activity, went into summer recess, did not have a summer budget. And I think this has been the biggest mistake that Rachel Reeves has made, and the biggest strategic mistake of this government so far. They say, oh, well, it's because the OBR has to get ready. Frankly, the OBR could have got ready. The problem in not having a summer budget is twofold, right? One, it meant that the winter fuel payment problem was seen in isolation and is become the thing that everyone has been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, rather than the suite of other fiscal measures alongside it. And it has also meant that their government did not capitalise on the early momentum of actually coming to office. So George Osborne has an emergency budget in 2010, so does Gordon Brown in 1997. There's a reason for that, and it's been a strategic mistake not to do so this time.
Yeah, don't forget, we did have the King's speech, right? Yeah. Very shortly after they came to power. But you've now had two events, essentially, a King's speech and a conference speech, where nothing has really been said. There's nothing to get excited about in actual tangible terms. And all you've got is somebody going, delay your gratification, it'll all be fine. If gratification's what you get from a budget, I don't know, that's debatable. But, just hang on another 5 weeks. And hang on another 5 weeks is a really boring and slightly frustrating thing to have to tell a country.
One of the things we talked about at the time of the election was, it was a landslide, but it was a loveless landslide. It wasn't because people were so fired up and enthused by Labour that everyone it wasn't the same atmosphere that there was after the 97 election. And the loveless landslide has turned into the hideous honeymoon. The honeymoon just has not lasted, and the feel-good factor, there was all this talk of sunny uplands. I mean, arriving in Liverpool today, and there were these long lines of people queuing to get in the pouring rain.
It was very wet. I mean, we should say there are a lot of people here.
I'm not blaming Rachel Reeves for the weather.
There are a lot of people here, and the queues are long because people want to be here. And a security queue in the pouring rain is not the most fun thing in the world, but that is not, that is not in and of itself a bad thing for a Labour conference. It's just that you haven't quite been able to start this week thinking, as they want you to do, we've done it.
So I suppose the kind of bigger question around all of this is, in the long term, if we are thinking, the next general election in, 2029 or 2028, will we have forgotten about all this? I mean, I suppose what it is a loss of momentum. There's a loss of sense of, this is the direction of travel, this is what we are doing, and we are taking you with us on this ride. And I feel that is the bit that I kind of don't quite know what this is about.
If you talk to people here, most of them will think that as long as number 10, and I know number 10 think this, that if they can use this mini crisis that they've had in terms of the way they've dealt with this, in terms of their comms in particular, if they can reconfigure, if they can respond to it, learn from it, get better, actually learn. I mean, they make the point, which is an interesting one, which is that this is the first time we've had a change of government in the kind of Twitter minute by minute kind of actual news universe, right? Even in 2010, that didn't exist in the same way, right? That actually means that the onus is on you in news management terms to be even faster in dealing with these things when they arise. They accept they didn't.
Or ignore them. I mean, you do have that choice.
Yes, you could have ignored it, or you could have responded to it more aggressively. The point is they ended up sort of doing a little bit of everything and it didn't really work. But I think that that's one concern. I think that the bigger concern that people have, and you talk to ministers about this and they will mutter it darkly, they worry about a lack of direction centrally. Yeah. They worry that this was, I mean, John, you talk about the sort of loveless landslide and so on. We know that one of the reasons this government was elected in the way it was is because they were not the Conservative Party. We said it on this show many times in the run-up to this election. The big test is not so much then, it's what comes after. What's the plan after, when you can no longer just say, we're not the Conservative Party, right? And there is a worry that Keir Starmer is a sort of politician who is, wears his ideology pretty lightly. In some ways that can be an advantage sometimes. It's worked to his advantage. He actively eschews and does not like the idea of kind of big problematic kind of vision of politics, doesn't like it. You ask him, which sort of Labour leader in the past do you most like, or do you admire most? He really hates the question. He doesn't like thinking in those kind of ideological terms. That's fine as far as it goes. The problem with that is it can leave you rudderless. And what we have not had a sense of from Reeves, and what I think Starmer is going to have to try and start to fill in the blanks of, is what is the vision for Britain in 5 years' time, which is not just let's hope things are a little bit better, let's hope that, the growth comes or whatever. Even talking about growth is quite nebulous, right? What does it mean? They need a narrative that starts to stitch together what the future looks like, not just the past. And if you talk to ministers and so on, what they worry about is that is not here and that is not there. And as I say, is actually one of the factors to the mire in which they've found themselves in recent weeks.
So the donor gate row is a kind of perfect example of the limitations of being a chief operating officer who becomes the CEO. Keir Starmer wants to position himself as the problem solver who responds to problems as they arise, and this is what he did when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, and this is what he did when he was in Northern Ireland, and that's his career, and that's what he wants to build it on. You do need to have a vision and give people a sense of direction, and that is the bit I think that people, as you say, Lewis, will want to hear tomorrow from him. And the handling of the past week feels to me like he doesn't quite know what to do with that sort of thing.
I think in terms of Starmer responding to things, there is a frustration that, particularly with the donor, that there was a line that could have held quite well, particularly with regards to hospitality, right? Which is simply that it is not unusual for people in senior positions in public life to receive hospitality. People in the media do it. Yeah. People in business do it. People in politics do it. It doesn't necessarily mean you are beholden to what they do. Journalists take plenty of hospitality sometimes, or go to events and so on. It doesn't mean that we can't report on those organisations. We do it all the time. And there is frustration that there was not a clear, very sharp rebuttal to all of that stuff. And funnily enough,
one thing I was told was that his answer on security at the Arsenal games was something that should have shut down that whole debate in one line. Yeah. And it was him that ended up doing it, as opposed to somebody else, being out there putting that line out when the story first broke. Well, why is it Keir Starmer? Why is it the Prime Minister that's having to do that himself?
I ran into our colleagues at the sports agents. They asked me to go and
Go
speak
to a
to
game.
Gary Neville. No, yeah.
Did you know who
They gave
Gary
me a
Neville
box.
was?
Look, I needed a little bit of help. No, he's very political, so I did know he was. You know what? Before we got onto sports questions, I did just ask him about all the hospitality stuff. And his response, which we can listen to now, I just thought to myself, you know what? If someone had put it as clearly as he did, all of this stuff would have stopped about 3 or 4 days ago.
What do you think about all of this Keir Starmer corporate hospitality at football? Is it a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, do you?
I don't know. I'm asking you.
I mean, I can't get my breath if I'm being honest. I'm startled and alarmed at the amount of scrutiny that this is getting. It's certainly a very different approach and treatment to what I think has happened in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, when I think of the billions of pounds of contracts that were handed out during COVID on VIP lanes without much scrutiny, when I think of the £40 million helicopter rides and the private jets that every single Conservative minister was getting, again without much actual scrutiny, and a man who's watched with his family his football team for the last 2 decades, paying for his tickets every single week, has been told that he can't now go and watch his football team because obviously his security detail want him to watch it in a certain area of the stadium. I find it alarming that he can't go and watch his football team when I know from meeting him here a couple of years ago that is his one moment of release each week with his children. And I don't think any normal person would begrudge a family going watching a football match together when they've done that all their lives and they're now being told that they have to do it in a certain way. So for me, I can't really believe it. It's a different level of approach, and what we need to do is go back a little bit and get those billions of pounds back from the previous government's awarding of contracts. Let's concentrate on that, because actually Keir Starmer's declaring everything. I'm not quite sure that last government will have been declaring everything either.
That was Gary Neville giving a very assured performance. If they're looking for, it's game of two halves, of course. If they're looking for a new head of comms for Downing Street, I think they could do worse. I did ask him also for sports agents about who, if Keir Starmer were a historic England football player, who would he be?
And what
Did you think? Well, who did you think he said? I suggested Nobby, but I don't really know who Nobby is.
You don't know who Nobby Stiles is?
I mean, I sort of do.
66 World Cup team.
Yeah, well, that's why I know his name, Nobby. But he said no, he took it very seriously. He says, no, I don't think he's like Nobby Stiles, no. What do you think?
Bobby Moore.
No, he said Tony Adams.
Tony Adams. Sort of
I don't actually know who that is. I know John Adams.
Tony Adams, Arsenal central defender for years. Sort of tough, strong man. Yeah, no, I tell you what, I think Keir Starmer's too small in height and stature to be Tony Adams. There we are.
Harsh words from John Sopel, right. Back to the newsagents.
Should we go back to the newsagents? Because in a minute we're going to be joined by Tom Baldwin, biographer of Keir Starmer, very close to him, former Labour communications guy, former journalist, and he is really not happy with the way things are going, and he says neither is Keir Starmer.
Well, joining us now is Tom Baldwin, who has written, I guess, the definitive biography, almost autobiography on Keir Starmer, called Keir Starmer. And Tom, where do you think Keir Starmer is now? I mean, sort of emotionally, where is his head after what has been probably the most fractious week for him since he came to power?
Well, it's been a big year. I think he's frustrated. I think he's angry about his wife being dragged into this. His wife had never asked to be involved in politics and found herself subject to huge controversy, front pages of newspapers. That really goes to the core of him. I think he's absolutely furious about that. As a friend of...
You're trying not to swear. I mean, I'm watching your mouth now and you're trying to...
I'm trying not to say pissed off, yeah. Or worse. I mean, look, a friend of his who watched the Arsenal game with him yesterday on TV, I said, is he more unhappy about the referee in that game or some of the coverage? He said he's really unhappy about the stuff written about Vic.
OK, so let me just put it to you now that when we choose as a country our leaders, we choose people who we think are going to be compassionate in the job and smart in the job. And doesn't this reveal just a lack of nous, fundamentally political nous? It might all be irrelevant. Nobody cares about one suit or one ticket or one concert, but they do care about the perception that actually they just have been a bit silly. They haven't been smart enough, frankly.
Well, that's a lesser crime than the crimes he actually is being accused of in most of the newspapers and by some of his political opponents. They're trying to draw equivalence with the hundreds of millions of pounds handed out in PPE contracts to their mates and their cronies, or equivalent with past scandals that affected the previous Labour government, like Bernie Ecclestone, the story I wrote, which was genuine corruption. It was a £1 million gift, secretly given, which changed policy. There is no equivalence to that. So if the worst you can accuse him of is lacking a bit of nous, having a bit of political naivety.
But you're agreeing with that, right?
I'm saying I think they were a bit naive about how they had these clothes paid for. I think they're a bit naive and not actually stamping on the story earlier. I think they should have done. I don't think it's a hanging crime. I don't think it's going to be what we talk about in 10 years' time about this government.
Of course. So what is going on in the Downing Street operation then? That, as Emily said, where was the nous? We thought this was a story and that you needed to get on top of this, and they didn't.
I think one of the problems in Downing Street operation at the moment is a large amount of emotional energy seems to be consumed with some internal battles. There is clearly briefing going on, and there are political appointees in Downing Street who think they're serving the interests of this Labour government by picking up the phone and telling journalists from right-wing newspapers details of what Sue Gray's done recently. Now, if they can't make a distinction between office politics and real politics, they should forget about being in the latter and get out of the job now.
But you've written about the ruthlessness of Keir Starmer. Do you think he's going to act on this?
One thing I know about Keir is he sometimes takes a bit of time to get to a position and realise what needs to be done. But when he does realise what needs to be done, he will pursue that goal both relentlessly and ruthlessly. And I think he probably needs to show a streak of that ruthlessness quite soon.
And do you know who these people are?
I hear names. Everybody hears names. I think it's not fair for me to speculate about particular names on the radio. But there are clearly some people who, for whatever reasons, they're upset about their salary, or they're upset about where they sit, or they're upset about not having access to this meeting or that meeting. And it's really destructive, this kind of briefing. I've been part of a political operation before, and it's so hard to get anything else done. And, I don't think it's what people will talk about in 10 years' time. People remember the big stuff. And I think you do need to, I think part of this conference is to try and raise people's sights out of this. But if you don't know whether the next thing you do is going to be briefed to a paper, if you don't know whether you can trust your colleagues, that is very, very destructive.
So what you're saying, because it goes to the character, in essence, of the people who are leading us, is he should be acting more firmly and firing these people, right? Is that what you're saying?
He hates briefing. He hates anonymous sources. He hates people briefing against his staff, even if it's members of his staff. If it's civil servants, I think he should be ruthless with them too. And I think some of this is coming from civil servants.
But then, aren't you portraying a picture of weakness? That this has been allowed to run for a week and has not been gripped.
I'm portraying a picture of a brand new government, and you do get these gears grinding with brand new governments. I did an interview with someone the other day. I said, can you tell me the name of the cabinet minister who resigned after just 17 days into the last Tory government? Because that's a much bigger event than any of this tittle-tattle about who sits where or who's paid what. And they couldn't tell me the name of that cabinet minister. It's David Laws, and we forget about that now. What we remember from the last government was austerity, Brexit, big things. And I hope what we're going to remember from this government is the big things that they're doing to change this country.
Tom, you are, I think, the only journalist that I know who's had an interview with Sue Gray on record. Is your assessment that she knew that the story that she was earning more than the Prime Minister could break and she shrugged it off? Or do you think I think she's denied that. Was that ever a problem in your mind?
I don't think she expected details of her salary to be leaked out by whoever leaked it out, no. And in the same way that you wouldn't expect people working here to be leaking out details of your salary. So I think it was quite shocking to her. And I think it was pretty tough for her. This is happening.
Is she still happy in the job? Does she want to stay on?
She spent most of her life operating out of the limelight as a very effective person, defusing minds and problems in government. She never really wanted the publicity she got during party dates. She's made enemies in the civil service, she's made enemies in the Tory press who thought the sun shone out of Boris Johnson's arse. she's made enemies in the Labour Party. Now, it can't be a comfortable experience, but I do know that, she's a tough person and she won't want to give up and she won't want to be pushed out of this by people anonymously briefing against her.
So you spoke a minute ago about the Bernie Ecclestone affair. We were both political journalists then. Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's chief of staff, swam in a very limited lane. He just dealt with kind of the machinery of government. Sue Gray ranges far wider than that. Isn't that the problem? That she is interfering in all sorts of other areas where people think, hang on, that's my responsibility. And that is why there is this resentment against her.
I think the sources of resentment against it are numerous. Look, there were civil servants who were humiliated by the Partygate report. There are people in the press who have never forgiven her for getting rid of Boris Johnson. There are people in the Labour Party whose noses are out of joint about the authority she exercises on Keir Starmer's behalf. I don't know exactly how it's working or not working, but clearly there are some problems with that machine because you don't get this scale of briefing without there being some problem in the machine.
We are joined now in our little broadcast area by Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. There's a lot to talk about. Rachel Reeves spoke a short time ago. Since then, the Royal College of Nursing have rejected the 5.5% pay offer that had previously been agreed, presumably because they see what you've done for other public sector workers and think, well, we'll have some of that, please.
Well, look, it's for the Health Secretary to talk to them to find out what the reasons are. I can't speak for the Royal College of Nursing. You'd need to ask them for the explanation. The one observation I would make is that we all recognise the difficult number of years that nurses and other public sector workers have had with the previous government, and as the Chancellor set out today, even though we have very challenging fiscal circumstances, she did make that above inflation pay award to public sector workers to try to draw a line under these strikes and to get us all back around the table to think about...
But it looks like they haven't drawn a line. It looks like they have provoked other strikes where people say, well, look over there, they've got that much. We'd like some of that, please.
Sure, but the debate is broader than just pay. I mean, if you talk to any of the trade unions or public sector workers, they will say to you, it's not just about pay, it's about their working conditions, it's about their ability to care for their patients, it's about the lack of investment in the NHS. And the one thing you know that you'll get from Wes Streeting as Health Secretary is a Health Secretary that's willing to take the difficult decisions to reform our public services. And this is part of the broader discussion with public sector workers that he will take forward with them.
The General Secretary has literally just put out a statement saying we're witnessing a fundamental shift in the determination of nursing to stand up for themselves and their patients and the NHS. This outcome shows their expectations of government are far higher. Now, anyone can understand what that means. We're not settling for what we thought we'd settle for, we're going for more. What's the answer to that?
Well, look, I'm a trade unionist. I'm a proud member of a trade union. It's right for members of trade unions to be able to organise and to collectively voice their position. All I would say to the RCN and to other trade unions is that this is a government that will work in partnership in reforming and delivering change for our public services. But that means, as they will know in any negotiation, there has to be give and take, and we'll have to talk that through with them.
So you talked about workers' rights, and this is a fundamental sticking point at the moment in talks between Labour and the unions. When we're talking about things like sick pay or parental leave, Labour's said that comes on day one. The unions are saying, when is day one? Is it after a probation period? And is that probation period a couple of months? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? So workers are really anxious to know when they start getting covered by whatever you're bringing in.
So we'll be publishing the bill in due course. The target is to do that within the first 100 days, which is what we pledged to do at the election. People will appreciate that when you're reforming employment law, you've got to consult with lawyers and think carefully about the draft.
When do you think it should start?
Well, I think a probation period is a normal thing. Employers and businesses
6 weeks,
will want
2 years.
Well, it used to be a year under the last Labour government before rights kicked in. It was then 2 years under the Conservatives. If the government brings it down to 6 months, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But of course, we've got to make sure we get that right and that balance right between investment, small businesses and workers' rights, which of course we want to improve.
So I was speaking to someone else who has advised the government on business matters. And this woman was saying to me, look, the potential tax rises on capital gains tax, we don't want them, they're going to be a pain, it's bad. They are small beer. But giving workers rights from day one, that is a huge anti-growth. That will make employers much more cautious. And when you've got a huge growth agenda. And I heard Rachel Reeves say, we're the party of business, we're the party of workers' rights. You can't have both.
Well, you can insofar as what are the things that we're trying to tackle? We're trying to tackle exploitative 0 hours contracts. We're trying to tackle some of the kind of use of fire and rehire, basically bad employer practices. You can build growth on secure work that works for business and works for workers. And Rachel was very clear today that we are a pro-business, pro-worker party, and we think there's some work to be done to rebalance that.
Isn't that spin? Isn't that...
No, it's substantive. It will be in the bill. It's legislation.
Of course, but people will say that you are going to have to make some tough choices there. If growth is what your agenda is and you want growth, above everything else, then maybe workers' rights are going to be secondary.
No, this is the debate about what we call inclusive growth. I mean, you can probably stimulate growth in the economy and make sure that workers are not protected, but then they're going to suffer and not benefit from that growth. Or you can have an inclusive approach to growth where you say, yes, you want to work with business on reform and investment and stability in our policy, but we also want to make sure that the most vulnerable workers, those on 0 hours contracts, those that are often exploited, have some security in their family finances
Darren,
as well.
You'll know that there are now a growing number of businesses, entrepreneurs, who are holding their breath, waiting for your first budget, ready with a default plan, which might mean leaving the country. Now, you could say boo-hoo, who cares if the super rich go? But they are the wealth creators on whom you are now depending. It is a big deal for Labour that you don't scare them off. What is your message of reassurance, or do they not need one?
Well, look, we worked a lot with business and investors, domestic and global, in the run-up to the election, and our manifesto reflected what we were hearing from them. That's why the Chancellor and I and the government talk about stability, investment and reform. They will see in the budget, as well as our policies on industrial strategy and infrastructure strategy, how we're now doing longer-term public spending settlements, which I will be setting out in the spring next year, that we are bringing that stability, bringing the investment where
You've
it's needed
created this
for the public
vacuum, though,
sector.
haven't you? Which is, they don't know what kind of tax moves you're going to bring in, and they are thinking, we might head for the hills. We might take our entrepreneurship and our wealth creation and our investment, crucially, away from the UK. You don't sound like you're needing to reassure them.
Well, look, we made a lot of commitments in our manifesto that we're standing by. So we're not increasing income tax, VAT or national insurance on working people. We are keeping corporation tax at the rate it is for the life of this
Inheritance
Parliament.
tax, capital gains tax.
Well, I'll keep going and you can keep going. We are going to bring forward the changes to the non-dom status that we've talked about. We are going ahead with the VAT on private school fees. We're delivering on the things that we set out in that manifesto. But of course, Rachel has said, we will have to make difficult decisions on welfare, spending and tax at the budget, and she will set out that detail on
and
the
if you
30th
lose
of
people,
October.
you just say, well, what can we do?
Well, we take a pro-growth assessment as well as a revenue-raising assessment in the Treasury. And look, these things are never black and white. You've got to kind of get the trade-offs and the balance right. But we know what the priorities are for the country, and that's investment.
Look, we had the figures come out a couple of days ago that now debt was 100% of GDP. Does that matter? If you are an economy the size of ours, and you believe that there needs to be capital investment, don't you just say, well, okay, we are going to borrow more to invest, to rebuild our prisons, our schools, our universities, whatever it happens to be. If you're saying that everything is falling apart, why does it matter? Who cares that it's 100% to GDP?
So the first thing I'd say is that when we talk about fixing the foundations and rebuilding Britain, you will see in the budget that we are talking about investing in our infrastructure, and you'll see more detail about that at the budget. To answer your question specifically, what matters is the cost of that debt, how much you have to spend each year on the interest on that debt burden. Last year, the country spent £115 billion of taxpayers' money just paying interest on debt alone. That's more than many government public services. So it's right that you balance the profile of debt and the cost of it, because ultimately it will take money away from frontline public services. But you're right, where we have clear policies in line with our approach to stability, investment and reform, where the market can see that public borrowing is going into investment that will create growth in the economy, then they're willing to lend us money to invest in the country.
Before you go, Darren, the Chancellor just talked about fragility of trust. And that is the question, isn't it, this week? That people are wondering if you have now squandered that people can overlook one suit or one ticket or one concert, but maybe they do care that you have taken people for fools, that you haven't been smart enough to know that actually this is a question of trust fundamentally.
We were elected because we're trusted on the economy. Rachel was very clear about that in her speech today. We're honouring our commitments in the manifesto on tax, for example, and we're going to be setting out the budget on the 30th of October, which shows the hard work we've had to do to clear up the mess left by the Conservatives, reset the budget so that we can start to deliver the change that we've promised. We will be held to account for the promises that we were elected.
And none of the rest of it matters. Can you look me in the face and say, the rest of it is just noise, it doesn't matter. Borrowing a suit or having a party doesn't matter.
But what I'm saying is that I recognise that trust is important in politics, and the promises that we made are the promises that we are going to deliver. And I would just say I think what you're alluding to is the declarations of interest that have been in the news. There is a stark contrast between some of our colleagues declaring donations and expenses they received legitimately in the election campaign and declared in line with the rules, a stark contrast between that and undercover journalists having to reveal parties in Downing Street and corrupt contracts being given to Conservative Party donors. This Labour government is very, very different to the last Conservative government, and that is the change people voted for.
Darren Jones, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And we will be back tomorrow when the big day will be Keir Starmer's speech.
Do you think Keir Starmer is going to mention that it's your book launch week?
I would think that would take up quite a bit of Keir Starmer's thinking time. He'll want to go into some of the sort of avenues of Strangeland and voyages of adventure.
He might do a
we
reading.
will have. Well, that would be good, and I think that would please the
Let me
audience.
just read a chapter from this. It's really effective.
We are now
what I'm
going
thinking.
to Stranger Land from John Sopel.
Where's John? Where is he? Where's John? Where is he? Stand up, John. Stand up.
Have I got a new book coming out? I'd forgotten.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. We just.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.